Hello?
Hi. Oh, it's working. I had to
It's
leave.
working.
If you could believe this, I had to leave my condo because they're drilling,
Oh,
because they're
oh,
fixing balconies, and it's so loud you would never
oh
be able to hear a thing. So here I am in my
no.
car, and
In
it's
your car.
77 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh my God.
Oh
Let
my
me see if
goodness.
Samantha's there. Anyway, I'm going to have to turn the car. Whoops, Sam's not there yet. I'm going to have to turn the car on because I'm sitting on a residential street and
Yeah.
I need air conditioning. So it's
Oh
so,
my goodness.
so, it's so bloody hot. What's the weather in Montreal like?
Oh, I'm not in Montreal. I'm in Paris now. And
Oh my
it's
goodness. Hold on,
yeah, yeah, yes.
let me get Sam. I'm just accepting her. Oh my gosh, wow, we are really international then.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm in Paris. So
Wow.
it's the evening.
Oh,
So it's 8 p.m.
oh,
Hi, Sam.
Hello, how are you?
Hello.
Oh,
Good. How are
my
you?
husband said this is so good, but I realized that he has it like tilted in a way I can't change this to the ceiling, which it does not look very good. So I'm now going to have to hold it. I'm going to
oh,
tilt it down.
I
Sorry about that.
have I have to hold mine because I'm in the car. I was saying I had to leave because they're drilling. It is so loud because they are fixing balconies. Oh my gosh, it's
Oh my goodness.
crazy. Yeah. And
Well,
I
you
didn't
have the
realize.
greenery behind
Yeah,
you.
no, it looks nice.
Oh yeah. Hey, yeah. Pretty good, huh? That's good. Good. All right.
All
So
right,
here you are
so
in Paris, and we're going to be talking about Toronto market as opposed to Montreal.
no,
Is
no,
that right?
Montreal,
no, no,
also
no, no.
Paris. You
We're
can
gonna,
talk about both, yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
So
we're doing Paris.
yeah,
What
let
are we
me
doing?
hold on. Let me clarify here. So, first of all, Veronica, welcome to the
Thank you.
Icons of Real Estate. As many of you know, Cheryl and I have connections globally, and Veronica is one of them. That being said, Veronica also spends some time in Toronto, so I have had the pleasure of sharing a coffee and a conversation with Veronica about the different real estate markets. And Veronica is well versed in not one, not two, not three, but four markets. So, where we sort of connect and we like to share and go, help each other and trust each other to help each other's clients are where Veronica is going to speak about is the Montreal market, the
Hmm.
Paris market, and Prague, which
That's correct.
I am still have not made it to Prague yet, but it is definitely on my list.
It's on the list. It's a beautiful city. It's a beautiful
Can't wait.
city.
So let's
But
start with we wanted to sort of talk about these different topics here, and one of them was the pied a terre, which now I'm
mhm.
going to let Veronica say that three words together because she is going to say them much more elegantly than I just did.
No, well, that's not true, Sam. But so basically, the way I started is because we now live between Paris, Toronto, and Montreal, and I'm originally from Prague. So that's where all these four cities come into hand. They're all cities where I spend the three that I mentioned, Toronto, Paris, and Montreal are cities I spend months in during the year. So I travel already quite a bit, and Prague is a city I visit occasionally because it's my birth city. So over the course of me being a realtor, what I realized is there's a lot of people who kind of live like me, where they spend months at a time and travel in between. And in the course of the years, I've now accumulated quite a few clients in each of these cities that are then interested in other parts. The fact that I know each of these cities, that I live this way as well, makes it much easier to kind of create a rapport with clients. And I would say since COVID, because many more people can work remotely, I've seen an increase in people actually asking me questions and wanted to know about how it works. If we're allowed buying, what's the differences in the markets in regards to price points, and also market turnovers, which are very different. So basically what I specialize in, and this is where pied-à-terres come in, it's properties that are around 750 to 1,000 square feet. In Europe, they're calculated in square meters, so it's under 70 square meters. What's interesting is that, for example, in Toronto, Montreal behave quite similarly, but I'll go into their differences. But in Europe, it's totally different because in Paris and Prague, there's no MLS.
Right.
So as you can imagine, like for us not having an MLS, so it creates a much more different dynamic when somebody is searching to sell or searching to buy, meaning that your relationship with your realtor becomes much more important, and the knowledge of the realtor within where you want to live becomes also much more important because they need to know all the potential sellers in the neighborhood. Now, I work for an agency called Barnes. So Barnes is originally, Barnes International Realty is originally French, and basically they now have offices in New York and Miami, and now they're creating this huge Barnes like house, which is going to be on the Upper East Side, that caters to this clientele that travels. And we have a huge international link of all our agents in one database. So even if I'm not, like, for example, recently, this afternoon, I was working on somebody who wanted to live in the coast, a coastal part of Spain, which I was not familiar with. So we were in communication with the agent there. So the agency that I'm part of is actually caters to this international movement. They offer also yacht services, and we can book private planes. They offer gallery services. You can buy art from all over the world. You can, if you buy a pied-à-terre, they can rent it for you and manage it for you as well. And the other thing I would say that they do is, for example, if you want to try a neighborhood in Paris, for example, Saint-Germain-des-Prés, that's very popular. What they do is if you want to come for a month, they can actually find you an apartment for a month. So they specialize in that as well.
Okay. So, go ahead,
sorry.
Cheryl.
I was going to say, so do they sort of act as a private, like, B&B idea? Because when you're saying
Relocation,
or is it a minimum 1 month? Like if somebody wants you to come for a week, do they bother helping somebody with that, or it has to be
it all
minimum?
depends on which neighborhood and what price point, but yes, it could be accommodated.
When you're saying price point, in Canadian dollars, what does that relate to? Because if you go US, then we're converting, adding, 35%, and if it's a euro, we're adding 50 cents.
45 per, yeah, almost 50. 50 is the safer bet, yeah.
Right. So what would it be in a nice neighborhood without going crazy if somebody wanted to rent a place for a month, let's say?
So for a month, so the standard, so for a month, it would be about, I would say, 4,000 to 10,000 Canadian dollars. You would get something really nice. The average rent here for like a small 1-bedroom actually starts at 1,000 euros. So I know Toronto, when I look at comparable apartments, Toronto is actually more expensive than Paris now.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting, and much more expensive than Prague, and almost by far by Montreal as well. So we are coming in a price point of rentals and purchases. We're actually at a very high point. Because if you look at what 1 million Canadian dollars can bring you in Paris, you can actually end up in a really nice neighborhood like the 8th or the 15th, which is close to La Seine, and it's not too touristy. and you can end up in a nice one up to 2 bedrooms. So now when you talk about Toronto is actually one of the highest markets in terms of price point compared to all the other ones, which is quite ironic if you ask me.
Would you say that the cost of living now we're acknowledging that the real estate is more expensive in Toronto, but is the actual cost of living more expensive in Paris, Prague? I mean, Montreal, it's similar, I would say. So let's go more international just for the sake of this conversation. Just it makes it a little more interesting.
So I have a family of 6. So I have 4 children, and I can say that in Paris, when I feed the children,
Right.
it's about 2/3 of what it costs me in Toronto.
Wow.
So
Okay.
and I'm not, and I really like, one thing we were really enjoying are the cheeses. Like there's the basics that we love, like wine, cheese, baguettes. I mean, it's the standard what French are known for,
Right.
but there's a reality that the price points are much lower. Meat is about the same, I would say, and restaurants you can get by about the same. So from a cost of living for us now being here for 6 weeks, it's costing me less than if I were to live in Toronto.
Right. Right.
Well, because so the effect, because in Canada in general and the US, there's such an increase of food that they said it was
Increased price.
9.1% increase
Hmm.
of cost. So they're not feeling that in
They're feeling
Paris?
an increase. From what I read, it's between 5 to 10%, so it's along the same lines. But the cost, a lot of it is produced within Europe, from what I understood. So you continually get the fresh produce.
Right.
There's a maximum amount they're allowed to charge for bread and baguettes. So
Really?
that's actually set. Yeah, in every boulangerie you go, you actually see the price of bread that it has to be sold at on that day. So your baguette stays at €1.30 throughout all the
I'm
boulangeries. Was
like a
so
Interesting.
shock.
so
Interesting.
so there are, like, how can I say, there's definitely, from what I've been hearing from my husband's family, there has been an increase, but I would say because they're all both increasing at the same time, and I always found Europe, or at least the parts of Europe that I visit, have been lower. So although there's an increase, it's still at a lower amount than it is in Toronto.
That's interesting. And I mean, also the other thing is that there's obviously a difference in the cost of living, the actual cost of the homes. Um, Food and entertainment seems to be mixed depending on these these costs of staples, like in France, they all have to have their wine and cheese and baguettes. But how about when we're dealing with real estate, how do you do transactions? Are they different? Like, in what way are they different between the way we do them now? Clearly, you've already acknowledged that there's no MLS. So that's a difference in itself, because clearly your realtor is super important, which is why we want all our Toronto people, if you are considering a place in Prague or in Paris, to definitely be in touch with us so that we can connect you with an agent like Veronica, so that you're very well taken care of, because it's clear that you need somebody who is right in the neighborhood that you're considering. So Veronica, do you want to talk to us a little bit about how else things are done differently in the
Of course, absolutely. So let me start with the Montreal market, and then I'll go to
okay.
Paris and to Prague. So there's the big difference. So for example, in Toronto, it's a 20-day turnover of our inventory, give or take, and we only have about 2 months of inventory on the market. In
Right.
Montreal, the turnover it's a 6 months worth of inventory. So right away, you see it's a much slower market from that perspective. The way it works is every seller actually produces a declaration of the home. So before you visit, you have a declaration of everything they've done to the home. So it's already purges problems, as you know, and this is a seller's declaration that is signed and that is part of the package, and everything goes through a notary. And I think that's the big difference, that when you're about to purchase, so you put in your offer, the offer is accepted, goes directly to your notary. There's no exchange of money until a week or two before closing date.
So no
And
deposits.
there's no deposit within 24 hours. And I think that makes a huge difference in a perspective. The notary assures that you have the money for the deposit, but then there's no deposit to the other agency, and it's the notary that distributes all the money. It's the same, it's notarized also in Paris and Prague. But then you have to deal with translations. That's another, which are other issues. So if you think of it from to purchasing something in Montreal, so the money doesn't exchange hand until prior to the purchase, and the notary is the most important person that oversees the integrality of the transactions at that point. And it's a much slower process. So if you're looking to buy, you have the luxury of visiting, revisiting again, and you know what's happening. The other big difference, I would say, the selling agent is always present.
Oh, I think in Florida they have that too, I find. Like when I went to do a few in
Mm-hmm.
Florida showings, the selling agent was there for every single one as well. So that's
Everything.
also interesting. When you say declaration of home, can we just clarify that? Is that pretty much our version of a pre-home inspection?
No, it's an actual legal document. That's a form. And that is, it's about 6 pages long, and then it could have added, and it has specific questions about when was this redone, has there been any leaks? So it's a specific
Okay.
question that is, for example, in our case, it would be an OREA form that is standard and specific and added to the offer.
You
So it's not an inspection, comes after, in
To
addition.
clarify, this is why we all work certain areas, and even we just had this conversation on our Monday
Mhm.
morning meeting yesterday, that, us as agents in Toronto, to work with a buyer especially, but even so, like, we should always have somebody going, to Muskoka or any of that. You should be
Mhm.
represented by somebody who works that area, because there are things that are done differently, and there are things that we are not familiar with, when it comes to the water wells or soils and all these
Mhm.
different things that can cause a buyer a true headache,
Absolutely.
and or a seller, because they're responsible. And as agents, we can be responsible. So make sure that you are working with a local agent.
Mhm.
I totally respect, and I know that a lot of people trust Cheryl and I, for example, and that's why when we refer you to somebody not in Toronto or in our neighborhoods that we know, inside out, then we definitely have a relationship with that person. We are not just Googling, because you can do that
Mhm.
too. It's super
And
important. Go ahead,
absolutely.
Cheryl.
Wait, I going back to set. Yeah, my hands up. Wait, um, the seller. How are they protected then to know that somebody's going to close? No deposit. Where here, you can try to get them to forfeit the deposit, and then or you can go
Mhm.
after them. But what protection and security do they have? Is it the solicitor or the notary who is
The
getting their
notary
word?
verifies, yeah, the notary
Really?
then verifies that the funds, they ask you for a bank statement. Like when we purchased our secondary property in the Laurentians, we had to provide a bank statement that we had the funds in the bank, and these funds would be used for the deposit.
Have you ever had somebody try to negate? negate What word is that? Not want to go through with an offer.
I haven't personally.
Okay.
I'm not sure if in my agency they have, but it also in another difference, if I may say, in Toronto, as you know, there's 100,000 of us, including brokers and sales representatives.
Right.
In all of the province of Quebec, there's 17,000 agents.
Okay.
Just so all the agents that are working are extremely like it's all their full-time jobs, if I may say.
Right.
And also, so the buyers, when we work with the buyer, they pre-screen them very, very carefully before taking them on. So it doesn't alleviate the risk you just mentioned, and I'm sure it happens. But from what I've experienced working with agents in the Montreal territory, the level of professionalism is much, much subpar. And therefore, I know they work very closely with the people they work with, like their clients, and they know who their clients are. Because every time I called and I was like, we had a listing that I was helping someone with, they could all tell me who their buyer is, how they're paying for it. So they all knew the trail of their buyer.
Okay.
Which I know, I mean, we ask the most questions we can, but now you actually have answers, which is quite remarkable.
And going back to in Paris or Prague, when there is no MLS, how do you actually, if somebody was starting out in the business, how do they know what properties are available?
Okay. So the way it works is basically so it's really easy to get your license. You literally go to City Hall and you buy insurance. Like literally, I could get, because I'm French citizen, I could get my license like this. You just go to the City Hall, it's called La Mairie, and you get your license. The thing is though, getting into it, the point so the structure, the way they work, they kind of automatically work as a team. So and every agency is actually very small. So even Barnes, they have over 30 different agencies in Paris, and none of their offices is bigger than 20 people. So they all work as a team, and when you start, you actually have to do a few years where you're paid next to nothing, but you learn. And then with time, you build your portfolio of clients, and then you're able. So the structure of how you get into the business, and if I may say, unfortunately, the business of a realtor is not very well seen, again, because you can just go to the to City Hall. It's getting in is easy, but surviving is really hard. But there is a very strong hierarchy within each office where they have a base salary that is paid to them, and they help out. And with time, they can, as they get their clients, then they can have listings or represent clients. At first, they don't. They're just helping out.
So are people obviously more respected the longer they've been in the business?
Of course.
And is there sort of like a lawyer where, when you first enter being a lawyer, your hourly rate might be X, and then when you put 20, 30 years under your belt, your hourly rate is X plus, plus, plus. So is it seen the same way in real estate? Like, is there a difference between what someone's paid as well as respect, or is it just a level of respect and, acknowledging their knowledge, their experience?
I would say there's three things. There's the respect. There's definitely a basis on the commission, but also there's the fact that you would get the good. And when I met with the manager of Barnes Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which is the most expensive per square meter in Paris. So to give you an idea, in Paris, the price points range between 9,000 to 16,000 per square meter, which is roughly, when you equate it to Canadian dollars, about $2,000 per square foot in the most expensive price point. So when I met with her, the way she structures her team, which is really interesting, is they actually have a team that only works with the 70 square meters, which was the smaller units. They only work on that. And then they have a team that only work on the big apartments, the family-owned apartments, some of which have been in families for 50 years. And those are the 200 square meters, or like the huge grand, where you used to receive 50 people in the 1850s. So it's a different market, and your reputation and your trust and your relationship allows you to then represent those goods.
Interesting. And obviously, for those that don't know, most of the properties in Paris are like attached, like old traditional, like they're flats,
Absolutely.
right? As opposed to
They're flats.
detached homes. There's not that suburbia that
No,
you can
no.
feel.
83% of all of Paris is actually sixth floor. It's called Haussmannian style buildings, which you have sixth floor, and on each floor, depending on the building, you have between 1 to 3 apartments. Now, one thing before I forget, which is really interesting, is in France now, if you have a good that's above $1.3 million, on a yearly basis, you pay 1 to 1.5% of taxes on the value of your good. And if you have multiple goods, it's the accumulation. And that also puts a threshold where you have a lot of goods happening under the 1.2 million. And then there's kind of nothing between 1.3 until the very expensive ones. So it created an interesting market where people are trying to stay under that threshold.
Right.
And
it doesn't
but then there's
matter.
a good.
It doesn't matter if it's like your own personal, like for lack of a better term, matrimonial home.
Correct.
It's whatever.
Doesn't matter.
You're still taxed annually, on top of obviously property taxes that you already pay. But then this is a personal investment tax.
Yeah, it's called the tax on wealth, a wealth tax, and it's applicable to your to all your goods, which is kind of hard for a lot of old people who have had apartments for 40, 50 years and live in them. Like I was hearing a story, there was one of our cousins, her grandmother, who's 103 and still living, and up to recently she downsized to 90 square meters. She used to live in a 200 square meter apartment, like one of those beautiful grand, and she couldn't heat it. It was too expensive to heat. So there's things like that. You hear that those grand apartments are beautiful, but at one point when you need to dispose of them, and for them it was really hard, who do they give the apartment to sell? Right? Because suddenly
it must be an interesting question and exercise for people to go through with rental versus purchasing, because when you do a rental, do you pay that tax at the end of the year?
No,
I'm
you
assuming
don't.
not. So it's probably a real number crunch to figure out which is more beneficial, to rent or to buy.
Absolutely.
When you are living somewhere like Paris, where that is, and you have this incurred cost. No different than when somebody moves from a house to a condo, and some of the small boutique condos have very large maintenance fees. It's the same idea. So, do you know if the rental market is stronger than purchasing right now? Like in Toronto, we're definitely seeing the effects of the rental market because the prices are so high, and then of course property taxes, all the different things. So when you crunch numbers, and the fact that when you're in a rental and people take care of things for you, that makes it even a nicer lifestyle.
I would say that here for about 40% of everybody rents. So renting is actually doesn't have the same stigma as it does. Like, for example, even my in-laws, they rented until their children were teenagers when they knew they didn't have to move anymore. So renting is a more accepted way.
Right.
Therefore, you have the luxury rental market for families that need the large spaces, and you actually have the large spaces to live downtown. And the one thing I have to, before I forget, for renters, it works very differently because the renter pays an agent. So they pay an agent 12 euros per square meter, which equates roughly for a 750 square foot, roughly like $1,000. But it's the actual renter that pays you, which creates a much different dynamic, because suddenly your value, like I was talking to a young student the other day, and he said that from his friends who tried renting on their own, it's crazy. There's lineups similar to what we're seeing in Toronto, but the minute somebody represents you that you're paying for it, it changes the dynamic. So that there's definitely a very high turnover in renting, and there's also a very strong market of renting already furnished apartments, as it makes sense, where everything, the apartment is set up just for you to move in, and these are from small to very large apartments. And the apartments start at around 1,000 euros. To give you an idea, I visited something quite beautiful actually in the 8, not far from, I'm in the 8 now, so not far from I am to Parc Monceau. The beautiful 2 bedrooms with, the moldings, traditional Parisian apartment for 3,200 euros a month. And that's all included. So when you think of it, when you don't, the prices also sustain, it makes sense to rent, if I can say. If you have a growing family or something, and you just want to be in a good school area, because there's a lot of little small school districts or lovely parks everywhere. There's one neighborhood that has 40 parks in the 15th. I mean,
just in case anybody's confused what Veronica's saying, when she says the 8th, you're talking loops, right?
Yes, arrondissement. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
So let me.
You've said it a few times, and I just want to clarify for people who aren't sure what that's all about. So it's Paris is all in circles.
It's like a snail, right?
Yeah,
it starts
so I just
like
wanted
the
to
first,
clarify
second.
that for people who aren't sure what you're referring to.
Yeah, there's. Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
Go
is
ahead.
there, like in Toronto, we have supposedly the most cranes in the sky than anywhere else. Is that happening in Paris, or is it just the older buildings that people are renovating? Right.
So what they're doing, they're actually building, so I'll go back to the snail. So basically Paris has 20 arrondissements, and then you have a big highway, which is called the périphérique. And then you have the outskirts, which are Scarborough, Etobicoke, North York.
The GTA.
So,
the greater
exactly.
part.
The greater Toronto. So in this case, I'll call it the greater Paris.
Right.
And there's quite a bit of growth happening. There's an area not far from where I am that they actually built it's a whole new area. So they put up about 10 new buildings. But the difference is the way they built them is none of the buildings are higher than 30 floors. Okay. So even if it is a densification, it still fits within the neighborhood, if I can say. Exactly. And what they did is underneath they built a mall. So basically you have 2 floors of malls, and at the top of the floors you have the 20 floor buildings. I'll send you a picture because they're beautiful. They're all different. One is like a wave. The other one is like a square. The other one is like red rectangles, like Modigliani style.
Modern straight lines and shapes, it sounds like.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Huh.
So, and it's not a lot of glass. Like I would say, if I can make a difference there is an aesthetic that they still try to keep. That said, there's not 3,000 new buildings that were built in the last decade, right? So they can control it.
So they're keeping the charm and character as opposed to just trying to be cold.
How do you compare
that
to Prague? Prague versus Paris, because let's stay in Europe, and with the cranes in the sky and the high-rise condo buildings, modern glass versus keeping, like we said, the charm, the elegance, all that. How do those two compare?
So what's interesting with Prague is at the outskirts of a much smaller city. I mean, the Prague Central is 1.5 million people, and then so it's more closer the size of Montreal if you want to do a
Right.
comparison. The way Prague is, it's actual hills. So at the center, they're not building new, but what I've been finding, they're building a lot of developments around, and they're beautifully done. I mean, I'm gonna call it Miami style because they're kind of those modern, like cement, beautiful white cement with a lot of views because there's the hill views. You don't get ocean views, but you get hill views. But again, the tallest I've seen is around the 2030 mark. Nothing is that big skyscraper, and everything is built in a way with that there's a flow within the outreach. And within the city of Prague, I mean, again, it's an old city, so it's hard to take down the buildings because they're kind of all attached one next to each other. But they've been building a lot. I've noticed on the top floors, what used to be the maid's floors. So when you think of the way the buildings were, you have the first 5 floors that were the big apartments, and the top you had the maid quarters, which are tiny little things, like about maybe 200 square feet, like tiny little things that are now apartments. So what I've seen done, beautifully done, because those maid quarters had the nicest view. Say they aggregate a few, and then they built rooftop terraces. And those are done very modern. If I compare the interiors, if you just look at it from an interiors perspective, I don't know if you see behind me, like you see a lot of the old moldings, the French door that probably date back from when it was built. So in Prague, you see a bit less of that, and they go more towards the minimalistic, a bit Scandinavian style design. And so from an aesthetics of what the population prefers, it's more on the newer modern, although it's in an old building.
So it sounds as if they're trying to control the density in
Absolutely.
the cities,
Yeah.
so not overcrowded and make it impossible. What about, I mean, everybody knows in Paris how everybody watches, going around in the circles and they're crazy drivers. But do you find that it's worse, or do you find it hasn't changed over the years?
I don't find it changes. The big difference I notice as a pedestrian or as a cyclist, because I cycle sometimes, is the way the streets are made is very different. Number one, it's a bit larger. Like even if you look at Avenue Road, for example, or north of Bloor, the sidewalks are larger compared to other smaller streets. So here the sidewalks are much larger, and then you always have a tree, and then you have the streets. So that as a pedestrian, you feel in a way very safe because the streets are very small, kind of New York style because they were built. So when you cross the street, it's just one lane. So if there's no car, you just hop over and you're at the other end. You're not looking at avenues like 6 lanes. So from that perspective, although there is a bit of traffic, I have to say there's more bike and electric scooter traffic. Those are quite, because they just appear, and also the moto, the 2-wheel, like little scooters, like the Italian scooters.
Yeah, the ones that you stand, and there's when you say scooter,
The
it's like a
sitting,
little
yeah,
motorbike. Yeah.
exactly. So you have them zooming through everywhere, but again, because all the streets are very small, you don't feel it. You don't feel the density of the traffic. And to be honest, the bus system is unbelievable, and as is the subway system. So naturally, like from where I am, if I need to get to, for example, the Louvre, I can take 3 different buses and 2 different subways just to get there. Or I can walk 20
And
minutes.
hopefully it's safer than the ones in Toronto these days.
So far, they do have issues with rioting. Like there's other
They're
problems,
big
if I may
cities.
say.
What can we say,
They're
right?
big cities, but you feel extremely safe and calm.
Nice.
Anyway.
Well, do you have one more question before we wrap up?
No, I don't have a question. I was just going to say thank you. It's been most informative, and it's a pleasure to speak with you again.
And when
and
you're back
enjoy your holiday.
Yeah, and when you're back
Thanks.
in Toronto, we definitely have to get together and go over things. So be sure you
Absolutely.
reach out to me. And if anybody has any questions on Montreal, Paris, or Prague, I have to remember them all. Please feel free to reach out to Veronica. She's tagged on here. You can follow her on Instagram, or you could always just call Cheryl or I, and we are happy to
Yeah.
introduce you.
And if you want to view a property while I'm here, I mean, I've been doing virtual tours for my clients, so I can definitely
Amazing.
just browse you through the
Interesting.
neighborhood and the, yeah. So that's definitely a
Fantastic.
possibility.
Thank you
Oh, it
so
was,
much for your
thank you so
time.
much. You guys
Thank
are
you.
Have an
lovely.
Very much.
excellent day. We'll see you soon.
Oh,
Take care.
Okay.
okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.